4.1 Ethical and Legal Considerations in Sport and Exercise Science Research. What does ethical mean? Ethical refers to moral standards of what's right and wrong. When researchers conduct experiments in sports science, they need to think about the ethical issues. The website reference.com says, an ethical issue brings systems of morality and principles into conflict. Unlike most conflicts that can be disputed with facts and objective truths, ethical issues are more subjective and open to opinions and interpretations. What does legal mean? When you conduct research in sports science, you must make sure that you abide by the laws that are in place to protect participants and researchers. For example, there are laws around data protection, health and safety, and informed consent to help protect the participant and researcher. The history of ethics and legal research. During World War I, the Nazis conducted horrible experiments on their prisoners of war and minority groups like gay people, Jews, and people with disabilities. As a result of these atrocities, the Nuremberg trials created the Nuremberg Code in 1947 to make sure experiments in the future would be carried out in an ethical way. An example of a Nazi experiment was submerging participants into different temperatures to find out at what point a person would lose consciousness and die. The aim of the study was to find out how long soldiers could survive in extreme conditions such as the Atlantic Sea. Another experiment was a high-altitude experiment, which simulated how little oxygen a person could survive on without passing out. This was designed for fighter pilots. In the 1960s, Milgram conducted a study to find out why people went along with the Nazis. He deceived his participants by telling them they were doing a memory test. The participants were told to give an electric shock every time the other person got the answer wrong. When the participant said they wouldn't shock the other person, they were pressured by the researchers into increasing the voltage. They found that normal American citizens were capable of committing atrocities just like the Nazis if they were told to by someone in a position of power. In 1971, Zimbardo conducted another similar social study to see what would happen if good people were put in a bad place. He set up a fake prison in Stanford University, and half the participants were guards and half of them were prisoners. When the prisoners began to rebel, the guards took it into their own hands to control the prisoners. Zimbardo found that the guards became power-obsessed, and the prisoners either went crazy or became human zombies who would do whatever was asked. He concluded that the evil place wins. The ethical implications of both studies are that the participants were deceived in both studies and their mental health was put at risk. The studies proved that good people do what powerful people tell them to do, but both studies were not ethical and they couldn't be conducted today. BASES stands for the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. It provides a code of conduct for sport science researchers and awards them accreditation to show they can be trusted to carry out research in a professional way. Scenario 1. The researchers wanted to investigate if a very strict or a very encouraging coach would improve performance in young gymnasts. The experiment involved children being separated into two equal groups. One group was taken into one room where they would be taught by a very strict coach, and they would be constantly criticised, and the athletes would never meet up to the coach's standards of what was expected. In the very encouraging group, the researcher would constantly praise the children, and they would be told that they were doing really well. They would take part in lessons for 1 hour each week for 5 weeks. At the end of the 5 weeks, both groups would do a performance of the same routine to see which method of training was the most successful. When the children were dropped off by their parents, the parents were not allowed to come in, and the researchers didn't explain the study to the parents or the children. They were not asked to sign a participant disclaimer form or fill in a health screening questionnaire. In the strict group, a girl hurt her ankle, but she was told to keep practicing. The children were not treated equally or impartially because some of them were praised and some of the other group were criticised. Because the researchers didn't follow the BASES Code of Conduct, they were suspended from BASES and they lost their BASES accreditation. They did not obtain informed consent because they didn't tell the children or the parents that they were doing an investigation. They didn't tell them they could withdraw from the study, and they didn't give them a chance to ask questions. Because they lost their BASES accreditation, meant that they can't carry out research in the future and they might lose their job. They were also sent on an ethical training course. Because they didn't make the parents sign a participant disclaimer, they are being taken to a tribunal and they might receive a fine. One of the children hurt her ankle, which means she came to physical harm, and the children came to emotional harm because they had spent 5 hours with a teacher who was negative and strict. The researchers in this study lost all professional credibility. Scenario 2. These researchers wanted to find out if there's a perfect body type for female gymnasts. They thought it would be useful so they can invest money in the athletes that they thought that would be more likely to succeed. They selected a girl of group gymnasts and measured the height and weight of each and compared it with their level of performance. They knew the subject of the study was personal and sensitive, so they went to an ethics committee before they carried out the research in order to get clearance. They also realised that they needed to be careful with the data that they released, so they disguised the participants' names as either letters or numbers. This was so they could keep all the participants' identities anonymous. They held a meeting with the parents and gymnasts to explain fully their study. In the meeting, the parents were asked to sign an informed consent to say that the study had been fully explained to them and that they had the right to withdraw at any time. Because they conducted the research ethically and legally, they retained their BASIS accreditation and professional credibility. Scenario 3. The researchers wanted to find out if it was more difficult for the late maturing boys to progress in competitive swimming, and whether early maturing boys had an early advantage. They investigated the national age group squad in a high-performance swimming club. The boys were aged between 13 and 16. The researchers measured their height and weight and compared it to the average for their age in order to discover if there were any late maturing boys in the group, or if most of them were big for their age. This could prove that late maturing boys had already dropped out. The researchers evaluated if the benefits outweighed the risks of the study to make sure that it was worth conducting. The main risk was that the swimmers would be embarrassed, but they were regularly weighed and measured as a part of their program, so they wouldn't be upset. Before the study began, the researchers explained its purpose. The children and their parents could choose to volunteer, but they didn't have to. They were given the chance to ask questions. The researchers acted in a responsible way, making sure they got proper informed consent and thought carefully about the risks versus the benefits of the study. They retained their BASIS accreditation and professional credibility. Scenario 4. The researchers wanted to find out if wearing expensive compression suits make a difference to top performance in the pool. They picked a squad of swimmers at a swimming club and asked them to do their best event wearing normal training jammers. Then, 2 days later, they would do the same event but with the racing suit on. Before the test, the swimmers would do a heart rate variability which would be measured to make sure that they were equally fit to race on both days. The researchers did not tell the swimmers what the experiment was testing because the swimmers believed that the racing suits make a difference and this might have an effect on the results. They got permission from the swimming club ethics committee before beginning. When they had the results, the researchers shared the information with the swimmers, but when they published the results, they didn't use the swimmers' names. They used letters or numbers so they couldn't be identified. This followed the BASIS code by protecting their anonymity. The researchers followed the BASIS code and conducted their research in a responsible way and kept their accreditation as a result.